Okay, tonight we are reading the Nurgla's Magic Tear. Katie looked out of her bedroom window and heaved a great big sigh. Oh dear, she said to herself. She talked to herself quite a lot. It was early evening and the sun was still visible above the trees at the bottom of the garden. Katie could hear the muffled sounds of voices coming from the party which her parents were having downstairs. In her hand, Katie held a pale, tear-shaped pebble which she had found on the beach the moment after her friend Fred the Nurgla had disappeared. She had met Fred on the island of Majorca, where she had holidayed there with her parents out of season. Fred, a huge and fearsome-looking sea monster, had been basking in a deserted cove when Katie arrived and changed his destiny. Instead of being afraid of the Nurgla, who had terrorized mankind for centuries, Katie had befriended him. She had shared her picnics with him, read him stories, and played house on the beach with him until it was time for her to leave for home. The tear that the Nurgla had shed at their parting held a significance that even Katie could not fully comprehend. Unbeknown to Katie, her friendship with Fred had been closely monitored in a cigar-shaped space capsule by the Shining Ones, highly intelligent coloured blobs that communicated by thought. The Nurgla was one of these beings, but due to certain unforgivable incidents that had instigated on Earth, he had been prevented from returning to the spaceship until he had been paid for an honest day's work, felt the touch of a human hand in affection, learned to love and be loved in return, and finally had shed a genuine tear. Fred the Nurgla owed his eventual reunion with his fellow beings to the little girl who now held in her hand his tear that had turned to stone as it had fallen down his ghastly green cheek and sizzled into the sea. Katie's meeting with the Nurgla had taken place a year ago, and yet Katie still longed to see her old friend and playmate once more. Gently she rubbed the pebble between her fingers and shed a little tear for the Nurgla. It rolled down her cheek and splashed onto the stone in her hand. I do wish I could see you again, Fred, she said softly. Turning back to the window, she rested her chin on the sill and gazed into the distance. As she looked, she became aware of what at first sight appeared to be a hot air balloon heading towards the house. However, it seemed to be going too fast for one of those, and was nothing like as large. Suddenly, before she could work out what it was, a coloured ball of light about the size of a football hovered in the air right outside her bedroom window. It made no sound, but just went round and round, glowing with a lovely red colour. Katie backed away from the open window, her hand still clutching the pebble. She was not afraid, but she was cautious of this strange object. She examined it from a safe distance. Its colour began to change as she watched, going from red to dark blue and then to green, and suddenly it seemed as if it was all the colours of the rainbow at once. Katie was fascinated and took a step nearer the window. Then a voice in her head said, Katie, I came because you called me. It was a voice she had never heard before, and yet somehow she knew it. It was sweet and yet strong. Not loud, but beautifully musical, and though she had never heard him speak, she became aware with a rush of recognition which filled her mind and almost burst her heart that it was Fred. Where are you? She whispered. I'm here, outside your window. I'm the ball of light you're looking at, said the voice in her head with a tinkle of laughter. But what happened to your body? Katie was bewildered. I want to give you a big hug, and I can't very well do that to a coloured blob. All right, said the voice. I'll be Fred again for you, but I'll have to make myself smaller or I shan't fit into your room. And in a flash, the Nurgla made his appearance on her bed. He was about the size of Katie's friend Emily's little Yorkshire Terrier, but much the same Fred whom Katie had last seen on the beach in Majorca, except with a kinder, more friendly face. How's that? He said with a flourish. Katy stood absolutely still for a moment or two, something which her mother was always telling her to do, but which she never did, unlike now. Then, with a cry of joy, she threw herself onto the bed alongside the Nurgla. Tell me where you've been, and why were you a coloured ball, and the Nurgla blew twin clouds of smoke out of his nostrils. One question at a time, said his voice in her head with a chuckle. Briefly, he told Katy that her kindness to him had saved him from being doomed to remain a monster forever, and how, when he went back to his own planet, he was made very welcome and forgiven for all his misdeeds on Earth. But how did you manage to come back? Asked Katy. Your planet must have been a long, long way off. We can travel millions of miles in the twinkling of an eye, said the Nurgla rather proudly. But in your case, the tear that I shed for you, which became the pebble you're holding in your hand, is very special. You see, when your tear splashed on it, it became a beacon sending out a signal so powerful that it could not be ignored. I happened to be in a spaceship circling Earth when your message came, and my leader, the Supreme Brightness, said that I must obey the cry from a little girl's heart, because it's the strongest force in the whole universe. So here I am. How long can you stay? And please stop make that smoking, because Mummy doesn't allow it. In the house, Katy waved a hand in front of the Nurgla's nose, trying to make the smoke disappear. I can only stay for 2 hours, I'm afraid. That is 2 hours of your time, which is 4 galaxies in our time. I have work to do. You Earthlings have made a nasty big hole in the ozone layer above your planet, and we've been sent to try and patch it up. Katy coughed as more smoke came from the Nurgla's nostrils. You're helping to make it bigger, she said. My smoke is ozone-friendly, said the Nurgla, with just a touch of crossness. Katy gave him a big hug. I'm so sorry, she said. I don't want to quarrel with you when you've only just arrived. Just then there was a knock on her bedroom door. Who are you talking to in there, Katy? It was her mother's voice. Katy sat up quickly. It's Fred the Nurgla, she called. He's come to see me. Oh dear, not that again, said her mother wearily from outside the door. She's had this obsession about a monster she's supposed to have met in Mallorca last year, she whispered to someone who was with her. My little girl had a phase like that too, said her companion. They moved on down the stairs. Can you smell smoke? I've threatened my husband that if he smokes that filthy pipe in my house... The voice faded away. Katy looked at the Nurgla and shrugged her shoulders. I don't think Mummy and Daddy believe that you really exist. Is that so? Said the Nurgla's voice in her head thoughtfully. I think we can have some fun tonight. I really do. Oh no. What are they going to do? Downstairs, the cocktail party was in full swing. About 30 of Katy's parents' friends filled the front room and dining room, and some of them had overflowed into the garden. Her father weaved his way in and out of the chattering guests, handing out drinks from a tray, while her mother supervised the buffet which had been laid out in the kitchen. Do have some more trifle, or perhaps another sausage roll, she said to nobody in particular. It was difficult to hear what she was saying anyway, because the record player was blaring out Beatles music. Katy stood at the top of the stairs and looked down into the hallway. At her side, on the end of the lead made from one of her hair ribbons, sat the Nurgla, who had suggested the idea. What a noisy lot of people, said his voice in her head. He was still the size of a Yorkshire Terrier, but of course looked like a monster. Come on, he said, let's go and get something to eat. They started down the stairs, picking their way through couples who were sitting there eating off paper plates. No one took any notice of them at all as they progressed towards the kitchen. Her mother was leaning against the sink, sipping a glass of wine as she spoke to her next-door neighbour, Mrs. Bramley. Nobody seems to be eating the sausage rolls, she said. Pardon, said Mrs. Bramley. This music is awfully loud. I said nobody seems to be eating the sausage rolls. As she spoke those words, the Nurgla's head came up from under the table. He extended his neck to twice its size and in a split second devoured 2 huge plates full of sausage rolls. His head then disappeared back under the table. Mrs. Bramley gave a little shriek. Did you see that? She said to Katy's mum, who had turned her head away and missed what had gone on. Did I see what? That awful thing that ate the sausage rolls. Take more water with it, dear. Katie's mother gave a little laugh and turned to speak to Katie. Don't make a nuisance of yourself now. Then off she went into the other room, remarking, "Oh, good, the sausage rolls have all gone," as she passed the table. Katie looked down to where the Nurgla sat, blowing little puffs of smoke from his nostrils. "I enjoyed that," he said to her. "How did you do that thing with your neck?" she asked as they moved off into a quiet part of the garden through the French windows. "I can make myself bigger or smaller, or give myself a longer neck or a bigger tail or anything I want to. But because this is how you last saw me, I have to be a sea monster. Of course, on my own planet, I can be anything I can be." A large gentleman came towards them with the grass across the grass, carrying an empty whiskey glass. "I say, little girl," he said, "where does your daddy keep the whiskey?" Before Katie could reply, the man gave a little jump in the air. "Ouch! Your dog's bitten my ankle." "He's not a dog, he's a monster," said Katie indignantly. "I'll give him monster," said the large man, aiming a kick at the Nurgla. The next thing he knew, he was looking into a fearsome face with blazing eyes and flaring nostrils. The face lingered for a few seconds and then faded. Katie looked at the large man. His eyes were like huge round saucers, and his face was all black from the Nurgla's smoke. "That's a big dog," he said quietly to himself. "That's the biggest dog I've ever seen. That must be the biggest dog in the whole world." He turned away and staggered off. As he went, they heard him say, "I think I'll go and have a lay down in the lily pond." Katie knelt down beside the Nurgla and gave him a little hug. "That was very naughty," she said, giggling. "I haven't had so much fun since I was the Loch Ness Monster." Fred's voice chuckled in her head. "Katie, where are you?" Her father's voice came across from the house. "I think you'd better stay out here for a while," Katie said to the Nurgla. "I'll go and see what Daddy wants and try to keep out of trouble." She ran off towards the French windows. Fred watched her go. "I could do with a good stretch," he said to himself, and then taking a quick look around to see that nobody was watching, he blew himself up to his full size. He now towered above the roof of the house and found that he could see into the bedrooms. Inside one of them he noticed Katie's mother talking to Mrs. Bramley, the lady who had seen him taking the sausage rolls. He bent his head close to the half-open window to listen to what they were saying. "Perhaps you should lie down on the bed for a little while," said Katie's mother. Mrs. Bramley nodded. "I've been overworking lately. Fancy thinking I saw a monster eating sausage rolls." She laughed a little nervously and lowered herself onto the bed. Fred felt a bit sorry that he had frightened the lady and thought perhaps he should make amends. Putting his head through the window, he tried to give Mrs. Bramley a reassuring smile. Katie's mother, who was busy covering her nervous neighbour with the eiderdown, making brisk little comforting noises, had her back to the window and so didn't see the ghastly sight of the Nurgla's attempt at a smile. As he drew back his lips, all his terrible teeth came into view, and smoke trailed briefly from his nostrils. Mrs. Bramley, who saw it all, gave one tiny cry and passed out cold. The Nurgla's head disappeared at once. Katie's mother clucked her tongue. "The woman's a nervous wreck. She needs a good holiday." She sniffed the air. "He's smoking that pipe again," she muttered, and left the bedroom to look for her husband. "It's time you were in bed, young lady," Katie's father was saying to her as her mother turned up. "You've been smoking that pipe of yours again. The smell is all over the house, and that Mrs. Bramley is having a nervous breakdown," she said, without pausing for breath. "And why aren't you in bed?" "Who, me?" said her husband. "No, Katie, of course. Come along." She took Katie by the hand and moved with her towards the stairs. "But Fred the Nurgla's out in the garden," protested Katie, "and he's got to go home soon. He's only got about 2 gloxies left. He's helping me mend the hole in the ozone layer." "What a vivid imagination you've got," said her mother, marching her through the guests and up the stairs. "I suppose that little toy dog you were dragging around on a piece of string is your monster." "He's not a toy dog, and it's not a piece of string, it's a hair ribbon. So there." Katie's lower lip began to tremble. "All right then, he's not a toy dog," said her mother, trying to be kind. I'll ask Daddy to go and bring him up to you. She opened the door and motioned Katy inside her room. Now go to bed, there's a good girl. Nighty night. Down in a secluded part of the garden near the gate, two figures were cuddling. It was getting dark now, and Mary Postlethwaite and Nigel Blunkett were taking advantage of the fact. They worked in Katy's father's office and were extremely fond of each other. Katy thought they were a bit touched. From the benefit of his high viewing point, the Nurgla could see them very clearly. He was intrigued by their goings-on and bent his head down to hear. Curiosity was his worst failing. The perfume that Mary was wearing appealed to him. Tentatively, he moved forward. He made no sound because he didn't want to, he didn't. His forked tongue flicked out and touched the back of Mary's neck. "Ooh," she said, "that tickles." "What tickles?" Nigel was surprised because both his arms were firmly around Mary's waist. The Nurgla took another taste of the girl's scent. "Stop it, Nigel," she giggled. Nigel, who had his eyes closed, now opened them and found himself staring straight into the Nurgla's face. "Ah!" he said, removing his arms from Mary's waist. It's a thingy!" He pointed over her shoulder, his eyes popping out of his head. Then he said, "Ah!" again, and in one bound he cleared the garden gate and fled up the road, uttering little whoops of terror as he went. Behind Mary, the Nurgla had reverted to his little dog size again. "Whatever's come over Nigel?" said Mary in amazement, and then she turned and saw the little Nurgla. "Fancy being frightened of a little thing like that. What sort of a man does he call himself?" She stamped her foot and, tossing her head, went back to the house. Katy's father met her as she came in. "Did you see a little toy animal out there in the garden?" he asked. "Yes, it's down by the garden gate." It just frightened the life out of Nigel, the coward. The Nurgla kept absolutely still as Katy's father approached. He allowed himself to be picked up and examined in the half-light. "Funny-looking thing. Wonder who gave this to Katy," her father said. "Better take it up to her. She gets very upset when she loses one of her toys." He knocked on Katy's door. "I've got your little monster thing here," he called. Katy opened the door. "Where is he? Has he caused any trouble?" She was relieved to see Fred in her father's hands. "Caused any trouble?" her father chuckled. "No, he's behaving himself very well." He handed the Nurgla over and went off down the stairs, shaking his head in disbelief. "That's a good one. Caused any trouble indeed." Back in Katy's bedroom, the Nurgla shook himself and settled down on the bed. "You humans are very jumpy, you know," said his voice in Katy's head. "What do you mean?" asked Katy sharply. "Oh, nothing." The Nurgla didn't want to get into any explanations. Katy might not have approved of his behaviour in the garden. "What are you doing?" he asked, to change the subject. Katy was standing by her little dressing table looking at some exercise books. "I've just remembered I haven't done my homework and it's got to be in tomorrow morning. And you have to go back to your spaceship soon." "Oh dear." She was close to tears. "Don't cry," said the Nurgla gently, because he loved her dearly and didn't like to see her upset. "What do you have to do?" "It's history," said Katy. "I have to write about Britain in the Stone Age, and I'm not very good at it. And tears began to well up in her eyes. "Perhaps I can help you. I can move backwards and forwards in time." "Yes, but we've only got about an hour left before you have to go. That's 2 thing-gummies in your time." "2 gloxy," said the Nurgla. "We can go back to the Stone Age in a split second." "How can I come with you?" asked Katy, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "Just hold the tear I shed for you in your hand and sit on my back." As he said the words, the Nurgla grew to the size of a small pony. "Be careful with your tail," cautioned Katy, as she got astride his back. "You nearly knocked my china cat off the dressing table." "Before we go, have you got your watch? Because where we're going, clocks haven't yet been invented, and I must not be late getting back," said the Nurgla. "I'm wearing the wristwatch Daddy gave me for my birthday," said Katy proudly. "Good. Now close your eyes."